Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The nature of titles, who should be called doctor, and the larger issues that it unravels and allows us to talk about. Obviously, some of you are going to be familiar with the controversy that we're talking about over Joe Biden's wife and whether or not she should be addressed as doctor. She has a PhD, but she's not a medical doctor. Now, that may not seem like something that we can expand to all these different topics, but we're asking you to stick with us today because I can tell you for a fact the conversation coming up is something that we could all use to hear and all need to think about. We're not really going to get into specifically this case about Joe Biden's wife. We're using it as the opportunity to explore what are titles and are they really important and who should get them? And not only that, but what does it say about classes in America and how we respect people? Really, that's the big theme today is respect. Where does it come from? What's the motivation for it? And are we doing it the right way? But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on doctors, education, and respect without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
In case you're new to the show, I'm going to start today's episode with our mission statement. And our mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. So please don't turn us off. Listen to us all the way through. Value what we have to say, and hopefully it sparks a conversation among you and your family and your friends, because that's what we're trying to do here. The word of the day is pronouncement. Pronouncement. It is a noun. The second definition in Webster's is a formal, often authoritative statement of fact, opinion, or judgment. So I think we're going to make a few pronouncements today on some of the topics that you mentioned, Justin.
You know, Lance, I am excited for today's show, but before we really dive into it here, I think it's important that we remind people, let them know rather, that this coming weekend, we're doing something special for folks, start of the new year and all. We've got an additional episode of The State of Us coming out. Now, we have not decided that this is an ongoing thing, but this is an opportunity for our listeners to get 3 episodes. That's right. 3 episodes of The State of Us in 1 week as opposed to 2. So we've got our regular Tuesday, Thursday release, which is what our listeners have come to know and expect. And we're going to push out an episode on Saturday. And that's a good one. We actually already have that one done. We've had it done for a little bit, and we want to see what you all think of it. So please make a note for yourselves that this coming Saturday there will be an extra episode of The State of Us. So you do have to look out. You're waking up Tuesday and Thursday mornings. You're getting your episode, but also this coming Saturday. So do check that out. We made a number of pronouncements off air, and now we have the opportunity to share them with the audience. Lance, who should we call doctor? Because this is one of those things that I think it depends a lot on where you come from and your status in terms of how you feel about this. I think there's a lot of people, Lance, that feel very strongly, right, that if you have achieved the a doctorate degree of some kind, whether that's a PhD, an MD, a PsyD, doctorate in education, whatever that might be, right? That you should be allowed to use the title of doctor, and be addressed, right, as doctor or, Dr. So-and-so, whatever your name is, as opposed to merely attaching that degree to the end of your name. And again, the reason, because some people might be thinking, this is all just about technicalities, but I think the conversation that it sparks, and this is the one that to us is perhaps the most important, does it really matter? And that opens up the bigger question about class in this country. Does it really matter? For example, is it important that you address the president as Mr. President? Does this use of titles, making sure that we bestow those titles to people, really matter? Or is that just a legacy, Lance, of elitism and keeping people separated?
Well, I'm going to start with a question. Why do we as a society put down others who have earned achievements? that I think that we're missing a point here. It's all about, we're all citizens, we're all equal, under the law. But if somebody has worked hard to achieve something, why don't we recognize those achievements? Why do we feel, and I'm talking about as a society now, why do we feel like we have to bring people down to our level? Why not use those people as goals for the rest of us to strive to reach? Why do we have to attack people who have more money than us because they have more money? Well, they just think they're better than me. You don't know that. By the same token, why do we have to put down people who don't have as much money? Well, if they just work harder, they could be as successful as me. Why do we have to judge people that way? Why can't we just look at people and honor them for their achievements and then say, you know what? I like that. And so I'm going to strive to get that as well. That way we raise society instead of attacking people who have achieved something. If we attack them, then we're going to try to bring them down to our level so we're all equal. That seems incoherent to me to develop a better society. Why do we want to bring everybody down to the same level? Why don't we work to raise people to higher levels?
It's a good point, Lance, in the base of the point, right? Of that, just because we haven't achieved what somebody else has doesn't mean that you need to lower them. It doesn't mean that the way that you should go about feeling better is lowering them. The other thing there is, why does somebody else's achievement have to make you feel less anyway?
It's very, very true. No, you're exactly right.
I think that's kind of the flipping it on its head of, well, why do you feel bad in the first place? Just because somebody else did something that's impressive doesn't mean that you have to take it as a, personal assault either. But on the same token, I was thinking about, as you were talking, Lance, because basically, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, but the idea here, right, is that, if somebody's worked hard and they've achieved, in this example, right, a PhD for, just for sake of argument here, but they're not a medical doctor, should they be addressed as doctor? And the answer, I think, based on your argument, is yes, because, they've worked hard, they've earned that right, and society should pay them that respect. How do we show respect to a plumber of 40 years that could fix any toilet problem? We don't bestow any special title on them.
In their chosen profession, it's not there. But how do we show them respect? Is I call them up first thing and they come and I pay them a good amount of money because I trust them to do a good job. I'm very respectful of those people. However, in our society, different achievements earn different titles. And there is something called a master plumber. There are things that are, or an apprentice plumber. There are titles to those as well. But again, in this society that we live in now, not the one I grew up in, but the one we live in now, we take all of those away from people. There used to be apprentices. There used to be the master blank, whatever, the master plumber, the master roofer. And we've taken all of those away because at some point in my adulthood, we decided that, well, it hurt people to point out the differences. So everybody's going to get a trophy. Everybody's going to get a certificate. And we're not going to acknowledge that some people are better at some things than others. So it just depends on your profession as to what title you get. So I think, but we've gone away from all of that. And I think we should go to that. I think because there is that level of respect and modicum of respect that we show for others when we do that, that then permeates throughout our entire society. So whether you like the president or not, you say, Mr. or Madam President, or if you're talking to a judge, you say Your Honor. Because then that lifts society up as a whole and we become more respectful of one another. Then we don't attack one another such as we're doing now. We put down people. without getting to know them because we don't have respect for them.
And the question that I want people to think about here, and it's what we'll start to answer in the start of the next segment, is because here's what we're connecting: titles and respect, right? So then the next item is, should a title be necessary to convey respect, or should we rethink what real respect is? And maybe titles are real respect, but that's the question. Be thinking about that here. We've got more to talk about classism and titles in America. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
We're making some pronouncements today, having a conversation, diving into the nature of respect in the United States and a question of classes, because I think it is difficult to discuss titles, what they mean, and who we respect without discussing the nature of often where titles come from. And some of the earliest examples of titles that we see are use on the side of royalty, right? And royal titles, and how to address those that were in a higher place in society. And for what it's worth, I shouldn't just say that in past tense. There are many people, not necessarily so many in the United States, but many people in other countries and in other cultures where that is still very common. Different peoples, depending on your class, are addressed differently, and has not so much to do necessarily with your accomplishments per se, as it does to do with where you are in the social pecking order. And I think, Lance, that's part of, to me, the greater question about, and part of the reason that people get caught up, I think, on all of this and the side they come down on has more to do with feeling like titles are reserved for, quote unquote, certain people, and that not everybody who gets a title deserves a title. And then, so this is our either or, right? Either titles are good or bad, because they're either from the nature of being a, class-based system that wants to separate people and draw the lines and tell you that you're not as good as, or less than, or they're, a sign of respect, and classism doesn't factor in. And I think the challenge in untangling those is that it's difficult to untangle them. And that is, I guess, the area that I get. There's this greater fundamental question of, in the midst of a pandemic, if you have people calling themselves doctors and there's not any distinction of what type of doctor they are. I know people that have been victims right now of going out and finding other podcasts where they have a doctor on, a doctor as a guest, and that person's not a medical doctor, and they're talking about COVID, and they don't there's no explanation that the person so it's just assumed, because again, there's no explanation of what you're doing. And I think that is an example of where it can do harm, because technically nothing was improper there. They were being addressed as doctor. They are indeed a doctor, but they are not a doctor that would have any expertise in discussing COVID or the vaccine or any of that, but people listen, and then, so I guess, what do you do about those examples where technically nobody did anything wrong, right?
Well, yes, they did. They were immoral. They weren't transparent. They did do something wrong. They played somebody off as a medical doctor when they were not, because it's real simple to take care of. You say, hi, we have Dr. Joe Smith talking today, and they have a doctorate degree in history from the University of Southern California. There you go. All you have to do is be transparent and open and honest, which is what we are on this show. So they did do something wrong. We talked about this. I grew up as a Missouri hillbilly. We had nothing, I remember growing up that I went to play baseball one time as a 9-year-old, and one of the young men, his dad was a lawyer, and he brought powdered milk, and we made baselines with powdered milk. And when my mom saw that, she started crying, because she saw that was 5 gallons of milk that she could have served to her kids, because that's how poor we were. Both my parents worked hard and got master's degrees. And that impetus for me then to value education and get education. I have gone past what they achieved. And now for people to look at me and say, well, now you're an elitist because how much money you make, how much education you have. I'm not elitist. I'm the friendly redneck liberal. I came from nothing. And I worked hard, saved, got a few breaks, whatever. Do you make your own breaks? Are you lucky, or do you work hard? And then you're there to take advantage of the situation because you worked hard. You were able to take advantage of a situation that presented itself. When they were looking for someone to teach at the college level, was I lucky to get that job, or the fact that I had all of those degrees and had taken all those classes made me able to take that job when the opportunity presented itself? Is that luck, or is that my hard work?
Can it be both?
Yes, I think it can. But instead what we say is, well, the friendly redneck liberal just got lucky his whole life. It wasn't lucky when I was putting in 14 and 16 hours a day to get to this point, and putting in 70 or 80 hours a week working, plus taking, 6 to 8 hours in college while I was married. Was that luck? And who couldn't have done that? I mean, that people I worked with had the same opportunity. Why was I the only one in the factory who was also going to school at the same time?
Well, and that's the one right there that I honestly, and that's just being truthful with the audience, that I struggle with. I don't, for what it's worth, Lance's story, folks, I think is one of the promise, right, that we have been provided as a nation, which is that if you put in the time and effort, you can make the life you want, right? You can come from nothing and get, arguably, 4 or 5 times better life, maybe 10 times better life, than you started with. So I think Lance is an example of it does work for some people, but that goes back to I think, and this is really hard because I'm trying to be conscious here of, I'm not sure the system has ever equally worked for all people. I don't think it ever has, but I think that there probably was a time where it worked for a higher percentage of society. Isn't it time that we do a serious reexamination of what we value in this country? You can work hard, you can be willing to put in that time, and you're still not going to be, relatively speaking, in as good a place as somebody else who did the exact same work 30 or 40 years ago. And again, it goes way beyond, do we call somebody a doctor or not, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're using to open it up and what we've talked about. But that to me is what I'm sensing. And honestly, I do struggle with it because, we did that show, our book earlier this year, Unconscious Bias, and it raises your question, not just about what are the things that you can't see because of your race? What are the things that you can't see because of what you have, right? Or where you grew up, or how you grew up, or who your parents were. And I don't think any of us are conscious enough of that. I think we can all do better at, being more aware of our own biases. I don't want to say privileges, because in all cases, they're not necessarily privilege. They're just a bias.
That was a great point, Justin. But before I give you my thoughts on it, I just want to tell you that I'm really excited about our Saturday episode starting on January 2nd. And it's something new. We don't know if we'll continue it or not, but audience response will allow us to make that decision. So listen in on this Saturday, January 2nd. And if the audience response is good, it may be a recurring show here on The State of Us.
Well, I'm going to let you react, Lance, but I just want to mention to people too, right? If you're listening to the radio version of this, because we have our syndicated radio program and our podcast listeners, this is an opportunity for you to get an extra episode, but you got to do it via the podcast. We have our standard 2 hours here for radio on most stations, but if you want to get that additional content, do check out the podcast, The State of Us, and be sure to listen to the Saturday episode and let us know what you think. Okay, Lance, you can go ahead now.
No, I think you make some good points, and I don't disagree with you in theory at all. But do we get to a better society by lowering the standards? Do we get to a better place by attacking others who have things that we don't have? And I will never say that I face some of the discrimination that others in our country have faced. But by the same token, when I transferred schools from Missouri to Iowa as a second grader, I was put in the lowest reading group. The reason wasn't because of a test. It was because I came from Missouri. And so, you're an Ozark hillbilly, so there's no way you know how to read. When I went in to buy my wife's engagement ring, the way I was dressed, because I had just come off a mower on the golf course, I was not waited on at first. And finally, when everybody else left, the owner of the jewelry store came and waited on me and began to show me rings priced 1/4 of the amount of cash I had in my pocket to buy a ring. And I was so offended. I said, I want to look at this ring. He says, you can't afford it. I threw my money on the counter and I said, well, you could have had this, but because you judged me by the way I looked, you're not going to get my sale. And he chased me out of the store, and I walked around the corner of the mall and bought the engagement ring in a different place. And I know that happens to people in our society a whole lot more than it happened to me, and a whole lot worse than it happened to me. So I'm not going to try to say that makes me equal to everybody else who faces struggles. I don't believe that. I know that because I was a white male that I was given some privileges that other people aren't given in our society. My point is, though, we all have things to overcome. And do we get there, and do we teach people to overcome these things and make society better by lowering the standards and making, quote, everybody equal by not recognizing those people who have achieved things? And by me achieving what I've achieved, I'm not trying to make anybody feel less than. I respect everybody. So why can't we work and use those people who have achieved things to raise everybody's standard of living instead of bringing everybody down to a standard of living that makes everybody feel comfortable? Do we really gain anything by taking that respect away from others? What do we gain as a society, I guess is my question.
It's a good question, and it's one that we're going to keep trying to answer today. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
We've had a lot of discussion today. I'm not necessarily sure that it's safe to say that it's all pronouncements, because I think in a lot of cases, Lance and I are trying to share how we go through this. And it's a little bit different kind of episode, because a lot of times we get to come to our audience and say, look, we've read through this stuff. Here's what we think you need to take away. Here's what we take away. And that's that. But this is one of those, it opens up a lot of different conversation points. And the one that we've opted to focus on is the nature of respect and who gets it and why. It seems like there's been a shift in America, this very weird dichotomy, interesting relationship here between, we elected somebody who generally would be considered in the top 1%, right, of earners, talking about President Trump. And yet we also have a society that has some sort of frustration with the ultra wealthy, while also having some kind of mysterious desire to be like them. And I think that Donald Trump's an excellent case of that for a lot of reasons, right? We've talked about, he was pretty much born into a wealthy family, a family that had great means. I mean, when your father can give you a small loan of $1 million, and that's not to disparage getting the loan and doing something useful with it. It's to say, for most of us, a loan of $1 million is not a small loan. That, to me, Lance, is one of the things that I struggle with then too, of, I think it's this we don't just value people for who they are. We try to bring in everything because I think we like to be certain that we know stuff as people, right? We like to feel right. And so we make our judgments and we make our analyses, and then we say, well, this is what we know, right? And we really don't, because again, a lot of people listening to this show probably don't even know that back history about you that you shared, right? They have no idea. And they've made assumptions about who you are and why you do what you do. And they've done that with me, right? I mean, that's because that's what we do as people. Lance and I are not above that. I try to be conscious of it, but I catch myself doing it, because I think it's that fighting what we are all naturally inclined to do. And some of it is good, but a lot of it, I think, turns out bad.
Well, I wasn't putting those people down, who come from wealthy families. My point
I didn't think you were.
I'm not saying that you did, but I mean,
generally,
the audience, I wasn't putting them down. And I think what people forget is that everyone has struggles from where we come from. We all have struggles. We don't see them because we say, well, how can that person have struggles? They don't struggle for food. They don't struggle for rent money, but they too have struggles. They too have obstacles and expectations that they're expected to overcome to achieve what they're going to achieve. And it's like the old saying, walk a mile in another person's shoes before you judge them. Because you said the word judgment, and I'm not attacking you, but we do that. And my question is, why do we do that? That's something that I've fought my entire adult life, is not to judge people from afar, but to take the opportunity to try to get to know them. And if I don't know them, then I don't judge them. I don't, in the old vernacular, put them in a box. Oh, you're this, so you must be, you're X, so you must equal Y. I think it can be done. But as a society, as you said, our inclination is to just judge people, or as a human race, we just judge others without knowing them. And that therein lies the struggle and the problems that we face, is that we judge people without knowing them. So then we try to fix their problems based on our judgments that we're not necessarily correct on because we don't know them. And so we don't take the time to get to know people, and we judge them and then make decisions based on our judgments. And then we wonder why we can't solve the problem. Well, you solve the problem when you get down and dirty and you walk a mile in their shoes and you understand what they're facing. Then you say, okay, now what can I do from my position of authority, or whatever I have, elitism or educational background, or whatever skill set that I have as a master plumber or master electrician? What can I do to help them solve their problem? Saw a great thing the other day. This out of work chef knew that restaurants were struggling because of COVID. He was out of work, so his family was starving. So what did he do? He started an organization that collected money, that went to restaurants and had those restaurants make food for the people that were going hungry. Bam. Used his skill set and his connections to put hungry families with people who were losing their businesses in the restaurant business because they didn't have enough business, with entrepreneurs that he knew, and they solved the problem. Instead of just giving money to somebody to make sure somebody was fed, they gave the money to the restaurant owners who produced the food, who then gave it away to the people that were going hungry. Everybody had a skill set there, but he took his skill set and he found a way to help people because he walked a mile in their shoes. And we don't do enough of that, in my opinion.
What came to mind when you shared that, Lance, is if we spent less time concerned with what other people had, we'd have more time to think about what we could do to improve our own situation.
And then to help others, which I think is a key component.
Yes.
It's not just about helping yourself, but as you help yourself, it allows you then to help others.
You and I have talked about, Lance, there are people that they can think about and take ownership of their situation all they want. And because of where they come from or what they look like, there's not much that they're going to be able to really do about it. Or as you and I have talked about, and I think this is a growing problem in our country, right? The lack of problem solving skill set being provided to young people. You can't ask somebody to solve a problem if they don't know how to solve a problem. And I don't mean, what's 2 + 2 and you've never taught them what a 2 is. I mean, you've never taught them how to figure out what a 2 is, right? You've never said, when you're faced with a problem, here's the different ways that we attack this. And so I do want to be clear with our audience that Lance, well, I guess I won't speak for Lance, but I'm pretty certain that Lance is on that same page of when we've talked about disparity by zip code and what you're born into. That's something that we that are not born into do have a responsibility, I think anyway, in this country to do what we can do to level that playing field. And again, level the playing field, not the game, right? You should have an access to the opportunity. Doesn't mean you're going to seize the opportunity, but you shouldn't not have the ability to seize the opportunity in the first place. Bradley, with your immense wisdom, you've taken this all in. Wow, he looks shocked at the immense wisdom comment. But you've taken this all in. You're digesting it. This is the conversation you wanted. He said, "Hey, we don't care about flying taxis, recycling, or student loan debt. Forget all that. I'm the producer. I know what's best. Let's go with this conversation." So you got the conversation. Is it what you were hoping for? And what do you make of what we're getting at?
Yeah, I think I made a good choice going this direction because I think it was a very interesting conversation that at least I got a lot out of. As far as what I took from it, there's almost too much for me to comment on almost. Maybe perhaps you could give me a specific question that you're interested in me talking on.
When we do episodes like this, we don't do them very often. And this is one of the reasons we don't. Our quality assurance team, Lance, may have something to say. It is difficult to come to a conclusion for people, right? It is difficult to say, this is what you need to come away with. And sometimes that's the tough thing about doing the show that we do is sometimes there isn't an immediate answer. And it's more about, we want people to be thinking about this because if we collectively think about it, there's a chance that we might figure it out. But we're also accepting that Lance and I can't possibly think through every problem the world faces on our own and come up with good answers. So what do you take away from today? If people asked you, what was the most important thing said today, to you, not generally.
First, I'm going to outline my opinion on the whole title situation. I believe if someone holds a doctorate's degree, then they should be referred to as doctor. And Justin asked a question if we have to use someone's title to show respect. And in my views, I would say yes, because language matters and the way we talk to people matters, and that's how we show respect. So that's why I think using those titles matters. And I also don't believe that speaks to a broader classism issue, because Lance's example is the example that I would use to say that it's not a class thing to be called these titles.
I like it. I mean, I think something you said there is key just to leave listeners with to think about, that language does matter. I mean, the nature of the show that we do, the nature of our relationship with our audience out there, with all of you, is one of language. What you take away from this show is how effective are Lance and I at using our words to share it with you. Because, for example, with this show, you don't get the benefit of visualizing us, right? Of being able to see our facial expressions or what we're feeling or how we're looking during the show. You just have to listen to the words and our inflection and what you take away. So I agree with you, Bradley, that words matter. I also think that we as a society have to ask ourselves, is real respect in what we say or what we do? And I think it can be both, but which one is more important and which one is the most sincere and the most real? And that doesn't mean you don't call somebody doctor, right? But it means, are you calling them a doctor because you think you're supposed to, or are you calling them a doctor because you respect what they've done inside, right? Internally. Why are you doing it? I guess maybe that's my takeaway, is why are you doing it in the first place?
Yes. You do it for both of those things. And you do it. And they go hand in hand. I don't, you're separating them, and I understand that. And that's a logical conclusion to draw. But, the pronouncements that we make, words matter. And those two things go hand in hand. You do it because you're supposed to, and you're doing it because you're respectful. And I think that sets a tone that would make it better for society. We get a better base to work from. But you know what? You don't have to agree with this, because that's what's great about this country. And that's what's great about doing this show, is that we're just trying to offer up some thoughts to get the discussion going. Because I think what we all want, whether you agreed with anything we said today or not, and even if you didn't, I hope you listened to the end, because that's what this show's all about, is not to get you to agree with us, but to get you to think about what we said, and let's have that conversation. And by having the conversation, we make this a better place to live, and we make it a stronger country, and we help all people to achieve their dreams and their goals, whatever they are. And that's what people should want. You shouldn't have to, if your goal is not to be rich and you just want to help people, that's wonderful. Let's encourage you and do everything we can to help you get there. If it's to get an education and earn a title, wonderful. If you just want to play sports because you like the exercise and you want to be a healthy person, great. If you want to achieve to try to some status of playing in high school or playing at the collegiate level or more, then go for it. That's what's great about this country. And we don't judge you as better because of what you achieve. You're not better, but we should encourage you to work towards whatever level you want to achieve. And if in whatever level you reach, we should be respectful of that, if that's the level you want.
And that's what we're about here at True Chat, right, Lance?
I sure hope so. And as I said earlier, okay, now we're going to end with it. But our mission here is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And hopefully you'll share this with people and it'll get out there, and we'll have more of these conversations. You'll have more of them with your friends and your coworkers. And they say, well, where are you getting all this good stuff? You can tell them, well, it's a podcast, and you can find them on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The podcast version of The State of Us is released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. in the Eastern time zone. And Lance mentioned all the different ways you can get it there. Remember, though, this coming Saturday, and that's January 2nd, you're going to have the opportunity to get an extra episode of The State of Us. It's the first time we've done this in quite a while, so be sure to mark your calendars and download it as a podcast. And that's a reminder, too, The State of Us is a syndicated radio program as well. But for our syndicated radio listeners out there, please do check Saturday, the podcast version out, as it is an extra episode. And we're heard in select talk markets around the nation. So check your local talk station, see if they carry The State of Us. If they don't, call them up and tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our recording producer and editing producer for this episode, Bradley Butch. He's been filling in while Devin's out. We'll see him next week. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.